giving voice to Bathsheba. Giving voice to Bathsheba this morning. There's an African proverb that says, until the lioness tells her side of the story, the tale of the hunt will always glorify the hunter. This African proverb speaks of the power of the pen, the power of the storyteller or the narrator. The one given the privilege or who takes the privilege to narrate biblical stories are powerful as they can put words in the mouth of God, choose when women speak or not speak, gloss over the mistreatment and the oppression of women, introduce and depict women in a way that leads the reader to believe that they are deserving of the violence and the oppression that befalls them at the hands of men or at the hands of God. The narrator has a whole lot of power. I've heard the story of David's abuse of power against first Bathsheba told in different ways. Even in my very own Zondervan King James Version of the Bible, at the top where it tries to tell you what the story is about, it says that David commits adultery with Bathsheba. That he simply commits adultery with Bathsheba, which almost gives Bathsheba partial blame for David's abuse of power, which we know is what? A lie. In fact, if you look at this entire passage that we just read, these 5 verses that are filled with sexual violence, if you look at it, Bathsheba never speaks because the narrator takes privilege to take her voice. She is named, she is identified the way they want to identify her, then sexually exploited through the voice of the narrator. As I've studied this text, I've watched many male authored commentaries gloss over the abuse and rape in this text and blame Bathsheba for her beauty. And if you remember when Samuel was distraught, when we talked about Samuel when he was distraught about Israel wanting a king, right? To rule over them and to lead them into battle, he knew a king would take certain privileges with the people. And he told them that a king would take their daughters as perfumers, as cooks and bakers. But what Samuel never lifted up from his mouth was that a king would send for your wives and rape your daughters. What Samuel knew was that whenever a power dynamic is present, there is room for abuse and oppression to happen when it is not properly checked. I want to say that again. Whenever you find a power dynamic at play, there is room for abuse and oppression if not properly checked, okay? So that's how we find many times through the system of patriarchy, right? That privileges men over women. That is already a power dynamic at play, and that is how we find things such as domestic violence and violence against women are often swept under the rug or just said that's a part of being in the system. But the gospel of Jesus is about liberation and wholeness and calling out the oppressor. And I can tell this morning some of you are struggling with my use of the word rape attributed to a king. The words rape attributed to someone in leadership. The words rape attributed to someone who leads a nation and wins battles. But isn't that what Thomas Jefferson did with his black slave, Sally Hemings? Oh my God, come on. They tried to rewrite history and say that Hemings was his lover. Thomas Jefferson was a slaveholder. He was a slave master, and he built quarters in his own space so that he could sleep with and dominate Sally whenever he wanted to. That is not about love. Rape is not about love. Domination of women or men is not about love, or children or boys and girls. It's not about love. It is not about being in love. That is about power and control over property.